Most people lose before the game even starts, not because they're outmatched, not because they're facing someone smarter or more experienced. They lose because they're playing checkers while someone else plays chess, and they don't even know there's a board being played on. Think about that for a second. The game is already decided before you realize you're in one. Watch what happens when you get blindsided by someone. Your instinct kicks in immediately. You want to react. Your impulse is to defend yourself. Your body language changes. Your voice rises. You want to immediately correct the record, explain yourself, prove that your intentions were pure. You want them to understand you. That reaction, that desperate need to explain yourself, that's exactly what they counted on. You just revealed your entire playbook by trying to defend it. The dirty player doesn't win because they're crueler than you. They don't win because they're smarter or more ambitious. They win because they understand something about human psychology that most people never learn. Something that's never taught in schools, something that nobody warns you about when you're growing up. They know that honesty feels good, that transparency builds trust, that fairness determines outcomes, and they know that you believe all of that deeply, sincerely. They know you're betting your life on those principles working. They're counting on it. They're building their entire strategy around the fact that you believe in things they don't. You've been trained your whole life to play fair, to keep your word, to be transparent about your motives, to assume others are doing the same. And in an environment where everyone's operating by those rules, where everyone shares those values, you're golden. You thrive. Everything works the way it's supposed to. But the moment someone enters your world who isn't bound by those same principles, who sees your honesty as a vulnerability instead of a virtue, the entire game changes. Everything you've learned stops working. Your strengths become your weaknesses, and that person is watching you. They're studying you, learning what makes you tick, learning what makes you defensive, learning what makes you rush to explain yourself, learning what makes you seek approval or understanding. Every time you react emotionally, every time you try to clarify your position, every time you seek to be understood, you're handing them keys. You're teaching them how to control you. You're writing the instruction manual for your own manipulation. Niccolo Machiavelli wasn't writing about how to become a tyrant. He wasn't trying to teach people how to be cruel or ruthless. He was writing about how to stop being a victim. He spent decades studying power. He observed kingdoms collapse and rise. He watched which leaders thrived and which ones got destroyed. He studied what separated those who kept power from those who lost it. And what he discovered was uncomfortable. It was something most people still resist today. He discovered that the people who understand how the world actually works, not how it should work, not how we wish it worked, but how it actually operates, those are the people who end up making the rules. Here's the painful truth that nobody wants to hear. Good intentions don't protect you. Transparency doesn't make you safer. And assuming everyone else is playing by the same rule book you are doesn't make you noble or moral. It makes you predictable. The people who keep getting outmaneuvered aren't stupid. They're not less intelligent than the people manipulating them. They're not weaker. They're just operating from a different set of assumptions. One group is playing by a moral code that doesn't protect them. The other group is playing by the code that actually exists, the invisible set of rules that determines who gets power and who loses it. This isn't about becoming manipulative yourself. This isn't a blueprint for betrayal or a manual for learning how to lie convincingly. This is about understanding the psychology of people who play dirty so thoroughly that you can see them coming from 3 moves away. It's about recognizing patterns before they trap you. It's about becoming someone who's unmanipulable, not because you're colder or more cynical, but because you're clearer. Because once you understand how the game is actually played, you stop being a piece on the board. You become someone who decides how the game goes. Let me show you exactly how this works. Think about the last time someone hurt you. Your first instinct, before anger, before disappointment, was confusion. You thought, why would they do that? You were searching for a reason that made sense. Some explanation that would make the pain feel less arbitrary. When you hunt for good intentions, you're giving the dirty player exactly what they want. You're treating their behavior as a mystery to solve instead of a pattern to recognize. You're spending your energy on their motives instead of their methods. You're investing in understanding them instead of protecting yourself from them. You're in a meeting at work. Someone makes a decision that contradicts something they told you last week. Your immediate thought is, why would they say that? What do they mean? You're asking the innocent person's question. You're treating their words as a puzzle you need to decode. You're assuming there's some explanation that will make sense. Here's what a dirty player is thinking in the same moment. What do I gain if they believe this story? What's my advantage if I commit to this narrative? What happens to my position if they go along with this? That question, that single reframe, is the difference between getting manipulated for years and seeing it coming before it costs you anything. When you analyze someone through the lens of what do they mean, you're already inside their trap. You're searching for intention. You're assuming there's some hidden meaning that will make sense. You're hoping for a narrative where everyone had reasonable motives and reasonable disagreements. Machiavelli would tell you that you're wasting your energy on a search that never leads anywhere useful. Intentions are invisible, they're internal, they're subjective. Incentives are the only thing that actually matters, and incentives don't lie, they don't improvise, they don't take moral breaks. Think about it this way, a dirty player doesn't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I hurt this person today? They wake up thinking, what benefits me right now? What position gives me the most advantage? Who's in my way, and how do I neutralize them? They're not thinking about morality, they're thinking about advantage. The only thing they're hunting for is leverage. The moment you start tracking incentives instead of intentions, the entire picture changes, patterns become obvious, behavior becomes readable, you stop being confused and start being informed. Here's the framework. Every action someone takes, every word they speak, every choice they make, it all follows the incentive structure. People do what works, they abandon what costs them, they repeat what pays off. That's not morality, that's behavior following reward. When you understand this, manipulation becomes transparent. You see it coming. You notice when someone suddenly changes their position. But instead of being confused about why, instead of hunting for their hidden good intentions, you immediately ask, what changed? What incentive shifted? What do they now gain from this new position? And you'll see it clearly. You'll see that the incentive framework explains everything. Their shift isn't mysterious. It's predictable. It's following the money, the status, the power, the advantage. Watch someone who plays dirty. Watch them closely. You'll notice something interesting. They don't actually hide their true motives. They just bank on the fact that you won't look. They assume you'll get stuck hunting for good intentions instead of reading incentive structures. A dirty player in a relationship doesn't hide that they're selfish. They demonstrate it constantly. They demand your availability while protecting theirs. They need understanding while refusing to offer it. They frame it as, I'm just busy or I'm just stressed. But underneath, the incentive is clear. They benefit from your flexibility and your compliance. In a work environment, a dirty player doesn't hide that they care about taking credit. They position themselves strategically in meetings. They speak up right before the decision gets made. They ask questions that let them reframe your work as theirs. The incentive is clear. They gain status and advancement from being seen as the contributor. In a friendship, a dirty player doesn't hide that they only want certain things from you. Watch who calls when they need something and goes silent when you need them. Watch who encourages your vulnerability so they can use it against you later. The incentive is clear. They benefit from having information on you while keeping themselves protected. Once you start seeing these patterns, once you've trained yourself to watch incentives instead of hunting for intentions, something shifts. You stop being blindsided, you stop being confused, you stop asking, why would they do that? Because you already know the answer, because it benefits them. And that knowledge is power. Notice who only cooperates when someone's watching. Notice who becomes vague the moment accountability appears on the horizon. Notice who suddenly invokes fairness when they're losing. Notice who was friendly until you stopped being useful to them. Notice who encourages your openness only when they benefit from your transparency. None of these observations require confrontation. They just require honest attention. They require you to watch what people do instead of listening to what they say. They require you to track patterns instead of getting caught in single incidents. Here's what most people do wrong when they've been manipulated. They replay conversations. They search for misunderstandings. They assume that if they can just explain themselves more clearly, things will balance out. They're trying to correct the record from inside someone else's trap. And while they're doing that, the dirty player is watching and thinking, perfect. They're so focused on my intentions that they're not noticing what I'm actually doing. A dirty player's move isn't always loud. It's not usually obvious. It's subtle. It's a shift in tone. It's a delay in communication. It's a sudden change in position. It's the way they frame events so that you're always on defense. It's creating just enough doubt so that you keep seeking reassurance. The pattern is more important than any single interaction. Behavior is more honest than words. What someone does when they think nobody's evaluating them, that's their actual priority. That's what they really believe about you. That's what they're really after. Reading incentives in practice. So how do you flip this and stop being manipulated? You start asking a different question before you respond to anything. What does this person gain if I believe them? What benefit comes to them from my reaction? What happens to their position if I stay silent instead of defending myself? What changes if I comply with what they're asking? Once you start asking those questions, the manipulation becomes transparent. You stop needing someone to explain themselves because you've already figured out what drives them. You're not confused about their motives anymore because you're not wasting energy on motives. You're tracking outcomes. You're watching positions. You're noticing who benefits from what. And the moment you stop needing their explanation, they lose their primary tool. They can't pull you into conversation about their intentions because you're not interested in intentions. You're reading what they're actually doing. You're tracking what they're actually after. You're noticing what they actually benefit from. This is how you become unmanipulable, not by being colder, not by becoming paranoid and suspicious of everything, but by asking better questions and paying attention to the answers that behavior reveals, not the answers that words provide. Everyone tries to win the final conversation. They focus on the decision that's already made. They want to renegotiate the conclusion. They hope that if they just argue hard enough, present enough evidence, or appeal to fairness, the other person will reverse course. Machiavelli observed something completely different when studying power dynamics. He noticed that the game is decided long before anyone even realizes the game started. Real power isn't established at the negotiation table. It's not won in the final decision moment. It's established at the access level. It's determined by who gets proximity and who doesn't. It's decided by who gets information and who stays in the dark. It's controlled by who gets emotional entry and who stays on the outside. Dirty players don't battle over outcomes first. They quietly decide three things early: who gets proximity to them, who gets information, and who gets emotional entry. Once those gates are sealed, the outcome becomes inevitable. The final conversation is just a formality. The decision is already made. Think about where you actually lose leverage in your life. It's not when you're in the final conversation. It's not when you're presenting your argument. It's before that. It's in all the casual interactions that seem harmless. It's in your availability. It's in your predictability. It's in the fact that they know they can reach you any time, that you'll answer, that you'll engage. Here's the mistake people make. They think presence equals participation. They stay involved because they're afraid of seeming uninvested or distant. They answer immediately because they don't want to appear unresponsive or difficult. They're always reachable because they think it keeps them relevant, keeps them in the game, keeps them from being abandoned. In reality, it does the exact opposite. Constant access is a vulnerability. Every time someone has uninterrupted access to you, they're collecting data. They're not just talking to you. They're watching your emotional responses. They're timing when you're most tired, most frustrated, most desperate for resolution. They're learning your patterns. They're studying what makes you defensive, what makes you eager to please, what makes you compliant. They're studying the weak points in your armor, and they're using all of that against you. Think about your phone. Someone who has unfettered access to you via text can probe constantly. They can test your mood. They can send a message designed to provoke a reaction and watch what you say when you're tired. They can ask for favors when they know you're lonely. They can withdraw attention when you're vulnerable and watch how desperately you try to win them back. That constant access gives them an unending feedback loop about how to manipulate you. The same thing happens in work environments. Someone who knows they can pull you into meetings whenever they want, who knows you'll answer their calls, who knows they can access you casually. They're constantly gathering information. They're learning your insecurities. They're finding out what triggers defensive behavior. They're building a profile of how to influence you. In relationships, constant access is weaponized even more directly. Someone who knows they can reach you anytime, who knows you'll respond, who knows you'll try to fix things. They can create drama deliberately and rely on you to chase after them. They can pull away and watch you panic. They can manufacture uncertainty and watch you scramble to provide reassurance. That constant access lets them keep you in a permanent state of trying to maintain their approval. Machiavelli would tell you something counterintuitive that most people never learn. Respect doesn't come from being available, it comes from being scarce. When access is constant, your value drops, your availability becomes expected, your responses become assumed. When access requires intention, your value spikes. When someone has to work to reach you, when they can't just interrupt you whenever they want, when they have to plan an interaction instead of having it spontaneously happen, the interaction itself becomes more valuable. Watch what happens in the dynamic. They treat the exchange differently. They prepare better. They request more clearly. They respect the boundary more carefully. They're no longer just casually probing. They're approaching with intention. They value the interaction because they've had to invest to access it. This is why manipulative people push for familiarity early. They initiate casual conversations. They suggest frequent check-ins. They send unnecessary updates. They do emotional oversharing disguised as bonding. None of it is accident. It's deliberately lowering the cost of interaction. Once interaction becomes cheap, once they have constant access, once they know they can reach you any time with any excuse, pressure becomes easy to apply. Here's what's actually happening at the access level. They're gathering intelligence. They're building a dossier on you. Every casual conversation is data collection. Every check-in is an opportunity to test something. Every piece of emotional oversharing they do is bait designed to pull out your corresponding vulnerability. By controlling access, you stop giving them that constant feedback loop. You stop being a training ground where they can test different tactics and see what works. You become someone whose behavior is harder to predict, whose vulnerabilities are harder to identify, whose weak points are hidden. So here's what you do. You introduce friction deliberately, not dramatically, not with announcements or confrontation, just gradually, naturally, without explanation. You don't answer immediately anymore. You let some messages wait. You shorten your responses. You normalize selectivity. You stop explaining your unavailability. You let interaction become intentional instead of automatic. You create the impression that your time is valuable because it's limited. Watch what happens when someone can't reach you as easily. The good ones respect it. They adjust their behavior. They become more intentional with you. The bad ones escalate. They push harder. They become more demanding. They get frustrated. And that escalation, that's diagnostic. That tells you who sees you as a person and who sees you as a resource. When you stop answering immediately, people either adjust or they escalate. The ones who adjust are probably operating from a place of mutual respect. The ones who escalate, who get angry that you're not instantly available, who frame it as you being distant or cold, those are the ones who benefited from your constant access. Those are the ones who are using that access to maintain control. Controlling access does something subtle but powerful. It forces others to self-regulate. They can't probe as freely anymore. They can't gather feedback constantly. They can't adjust their tactics in real time based on your reactions. This is where dirty players get uncomfortable because they lose their primary weapon, constant contact. The fear most people have is that boundaries will make them look cold or distant or arrogant. They're afraid people will think they're being difficult or stuck up. Dirty players rely on that fear. They frame openness as strength and boundaries as insecurity. They suggest that if you really cared, you'd be available. That real friends always have time. That trust means unrestricted access. Machiavelli saw through it immediately. Strength doesn't require constant explanation. Authority doesn't require constant presence. Confidence doesn't require constant engagement. Respect grows from consistency, not availability. When you control access, you reverse the flow of effort. Others begin investing more to reach you. They prepare better. They reveal priorities faster. They treat you differently because the dynamic has shifted. And that shift is where your actual power begins. Your instinct is to complete things, to finish conversations, to reach resolution, to have understanding. You want to feel like the exchange is settled, that everything's clear, that there's no ambiguity left hanging in the air. This impulse is completely natural. It's also a vulnerability that dirty players exploit constantly. Here's why. The moment you rush to closure, you give them the information they've been waiting for. You reveal what matters to you. You show them where they need to push next. You explain yourself in ways that clarify your position instead of protecting it. When someone provokes you into tension, they're not actually interested in resolving it. They're waiting for you to break silence to ease the discomfort. And the moment you do, when you offer clarification, reassurance, or explanation, they've got what they needed. You've handed them the key to understanding you. Machiavelli understood that people talk the most when they're uncertain. Silence creates space. That space gets filled with projection. Projection reveals intent. When you stay ambiguous about where you stand, what you're thinking, and how you've interpreted events, the other person gets exposed. They keep talking, they keep adjusting, they keep trying to steer outcomes through over-communication. Most people don't do this naturally. They want to explain themselves. They want to be understood accurately. They want closure. They interpret silence as awkward, so they rush to fill it. They can't sit with the discomfort of ambiguity. This is the opposite of strategy. An unfinished posture keeps control mobile. When others don't know your position, they're forced to improvise. Improvisation reveals priorities. Improvisation shows cracks. It shows you what they actually care about protecting. Here's the tactical move. When someone misunderstands you and the misunderstanding doesn't cost you position, let it stand. Don't correct it immediately. Let their next move tell you whether the confusion is innocent or useful to them. If someone is genuinely confused and trying to understand, they'll attempt to find clarity with you. If someone is deliberately misinterpreting because it serves them, they'll keep acting on the misunderstanding and test whether you'll object. You'll know which one it is if you wait long enough. One incident shows you nothing. Repetition shows you everything. When you close loops too early, you delete valuable data. You erase the evidence. Most people reveal too much because they want to be seen accurately. Dirty players weaponize this by misinterpreting deliberately, knowing you'll rush to explain yourself. The moment you explain, you expose your priorities. You show what matters to you. You reveal where you feel vulnerable. You've essentially handed them the map. Instead, let people sit in uncertainty. Let them experience the discomfort of not knowing. Let them show you who they are when they think they're winning, when they think they've got the advantage, when they think you're vulnerable. An unfinished position also protects your internal flexibility. When you don't publicly commit to a stance, when you don't nail yourself down to a position, you keep options open. You can reassess without defending a previous position. Commitment narrows your range. Ambiguity preserves it. It keeps you adaptable. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you stop seeking resolution. People expect you to need closure. They expect you to be uncomfortable with hanging questions and loose ends. When you don't seek closure, when you're okay with ambiguity, you trigger an imbalance. They feel it. They escalate. They push for answers. They demand timelines. They manufacture urgency. And each attempt tells you something about their actual priority. Each escalation reveals what they're really hunting for. The dirty player's goal is to force conclusions because conclusions lock you in place. An unfinished stance denies them that lock. It keeps you mobile. It keeps your options open. Understanding why silence is so powerful requires looking at the deeper psychology. When you respond, you give information. You reveal what matters. You show where you're vulnerable. But when you stay silent, you create a vacuum. That vacuum gets filled by the other person's interpretation, and their interpretation reveals their priorities. Think about a scenario at work. Someone accuses you of something. Your instinct is to immediately defend yourself. But if you stay quiet, what happens? The accuser gets nervous. They fill the silence with more explanations. They add details they didn't need to add. They explain their reasoning more thoroughly than they would have if you'd immediately objected. In that expanded explanation, you learn their real motivation. You discover what they're actually hunting for, or in a relationship. Someone says something designed to hurt you or provoke you. Your instinct is to react, to defend, to explain. But if you stay calm and unresponsive, what happens? The person who said it gets uncomfortable. They try again, harder. They escalate. They test what it takes to get a reaction from you. And in that testing, you see exactly what kind of person they are when they don't get the response they wanted. When you stay unfinished, when you don't complete the narrative, you're actually protecting yourself strategically. You're preventing yourself from being locked into positions that might not serve you. You're maintaining the ability to adapt as new information comes in. This is particularly important in conflicts or negotiations. If you state your position clearly and firmly early, you've limited your options. You've committed publicly. If circumstances change or new information emerges, backing down from a public position looks weak. But if you've remained ambiguous, if you haven't fully committed, you can shift your approach without losing face. Watch what happens when you get angry in an argument. Notice how the other person suddenly knows exactly where to aim next. They've found the hot spot. You just showed them the target. You painted a giant X on it with your reaction. This is the core of how manipulation works at the psychological level. Every emotional shift you display is a signal. Every reaction is a beacon. Frustration shows where pressure works. Defensiveness shows where insecurity hides. Excitement reveals where desire lives. Fear exposes where your actual weakness is. Dirty players aren't hunting for honesty or truth. They're hunting for reaction points. They're looking for the things that make you lose control. They're studying your triggers so they can pull them whenever they need leverage. Machiavelli observed something that seems counterintuitive. The people with the most power in the room are rarely the loudest. They're the most neutral. They're the most measured. Neutrality isn't indifference. It's not emotional suppression or coldness. It's discipline. You can care deeply about something without broadcasting exactly how much you care. You can be affected by something without advertising where it got under your skin. You can have strong feelings without displaying them in ways that damage your position. Here's what happens when you maintain neutrality. The other person loses their map. They can't locate leverage. Their tactics become useless, so they escalate. They test louder, they become more aggressive, they sharpen their tone, they exaggerate the stakes, they bring in new accusations, they change tactics. Each escalation reveals more about them than about you, and you're just sitting there, calm, observing, taking notes. The person expressing emotion is the one being managed. The person remaining even-toned is the one doing the managing. The person who's reactive is being controlled by the situation. The person who's calm is controlling the situation. Most people confuse this with coldness or disconnection. They think that emotional restraint means you don't care, that you're becoming robotic, that you're suppressing who you really are. Machiavelli understood it differently. Emotional restraint means you care enough not to display it. It means you're strategic about what you show and when you show it. Notice what happens when you stay calm in situations where others expect you to escalate. They double down, they get louder, they sharpen their tone, they exaggerate the stakes, they bring in new accusations, they change tactics. This isn't confidence, it's the sound of someone losing their orientation. When they can't read you, they can't predict you. When they can't predict you, their tactics fail. Neutrality disrupts narrative traps completely. When you respond emotionally, others can frame you as threatened, reactive, invested, defensive. When you remain even-toned, framing becomes impossible. People struggle to assign motive. Without motive, they can't judge you effectively. Without judgment, they can't control the narrative. Dirty players rely on labels. Sensitive, difficult, unreasonable, threatened, defensive. Labels stick best when emotion supports them. Labels dissolve when neutral behavior starves them of fuel. There's also an internal benefit that most people don't realize. Emotional containment preserves clarity. When reactions are paused, perception sharpens. You notice inconsistencies in what they're saying. You catch timing shifts in their behavior. You see alignment or lack of it between what someone says and what they actually do. Here's where most intelligent people get outplayed. They're focused on the immediate exchange while someone else is already 3 moves ahead, reshaping the entire context so that whatever choice they make, the outcome favors the dirty player. Linear thinking traps you. Cause leads to response. Action demands reaction. Pressure requires resolution. You're following a path they've already arranged for you. You're playing the game they designed. You're operating inside the structure they created. Machiavelli observed that layered thinkers always beat linear thinkers. When you're focused on the immediate problem, they're already altering context. When you're arguing the point, they're redirecting attention entirely. When you're defending the accusation, they've already shifted the audience. When you're preparing your rebuttal, they've moved the conversation to a different topic entirely. You're playing last turn's game while they're already on the next level. The most effective move isn't straightforward, it's lateral, it's perpendicular, it's moving to a completely different plane where the previous game doesn't apply. Instead of responding directly to pressure, you change the surrounding conditions. Instead of answering their question, you alter whether the question even matters anymore. Instead of defending inside their frame, you step outside the frame entirely. Instead of playing their game, you change what game is being played. Watch how dirty players do this instinctively. When challenged, they don't argue the point. They redirect. They introduce a new variable. They change the timing. They shift who's watching. They bring in new information. Suddenly, the original issue dissolves without ever being addressed. The person challenging them gets confused because the ground shifted beneath them. Here's an example. Someone confronts you about a mistake you made. A linear response is to defend it, explain it, try to correct it. But a layered response is different. You acknowledge the mistake without dwelling on it, then immediately shift focus to what comes next. You pivot to a larger issue. You reframe the whole situation. Suddenly the conversation isn't about the mistake anymore. It's about the future direction. The person who wanted to focus on blame now finds themselves talking about strategy. Linear thinkers chase the issue. They keep arguing the point even as it becomes irrelevant. They're so focused on defending the past that they miss the future being reorganized around them. Layered thinkers outgrow it. They move to a different level where the issue doesn't even matter. To stop thinking in straight lines, you have to recognize that no interaction exists in isolation. Every conversation sits inside a broader environment. Reputation, alliances, timing, who's watching, what leverage exists. Before you respond to anything, ask a different question. What larger structure does this situation belong to? What's the actual game being played here? What level is the real power being exercised at? Once you see the structure, your options multiply. If someone pressures you publicly, the issue isn't the accusation, it's the setting. Defending the accusation inside that setting strengthens their frame because you're playing by their rules. Repositioning, delaying, redirecting, removing the audience collapses it entirely. You're not defending. You're escaping the trap. Think about a situation where someone makes an accusation in front of a group. A linear response is immediate defense. You explain yourself right there. But in doing that, you've accepted their framing. You've made the proof of innocence your responsibility. You've positioned yourself as the defendant in their courtroom. A layered response is different. You don't engage with the accusation in that moment. You change the context. You handle it privately later. You build understanding with individuals separately. You make the group dynamic less relevant. You shift the pressure off yourself and back onto them. Suddenly their accusation loses power because it's not being reinforced by the group dynamic. Linear thinking also creates false urgency. You feel pressure to answer now, decide now, react now. You feel like the moment is critical and you have to respond. Dirty players manufacture this urgency because it shortens your strategic range. It forces you to move from emotion instead of clarity. It prevents you from thinking layered because you're stuck in the immediate. Here's what most people get wrong about power. They think it's built through visibility, through constant presence, through showing up all the time. They stay available, they show up constantly, they respond immediately, they explain themselves relentlessly, and without noticing it, they drain their own authority. Influence doesn't grow through noise, it grows in silence. Scarcity creates gravity. Absence forces attention. When you're always accessible, people stop measuring you. Your value becomes assumed. It becomes background noise. When you pull back intentionally, something shifts. People start calculating. They notice the gap. The vacuum you create demands explanation. Strategic absence isn't disappearance. It's not ghosting or ignoring people. It's controlled withdrawal. It's knowing exactly when to step back so others feel the impact of your absence. It's deciding to be less available so your availability becomes more valuable. Humans are wired to notice loss more than gain. You ignore what feels guaranteed. You obsess over what feels uncertain. When you remove yourself without drama, no announcement, no explanation, no emotional residue, you trigger a subtle rebalancing. Conversations shift. Your name enters rooms you're no longer in. People begin reassessing your role, not because you demanded attention, but because you stopped offering it. Not because you announced anything, but because you became less available. This is where real leverage forms. Weak individuals fear being forgotten. They chase relevance. They overshare. They maintain constant contact. They're terrified of being irrelevant or abandoned. Strong individuals understand that mystery preserves relevance. When you're not constantly visible, your actions carry more weight when you return. Your words feel deliberate instead of reactive. Your presence feels chosen, not desperate. Silence unsettles those who relied on your predictability. Distance exposes dependency, and in that exposure you see who actually valued you and who was just using your availability as a convenience, who saw you as a person and who saw you as a resource. The mistake people make is vanishing emotionally while remaining physically present. They stay around but disengage mentally. They become cold while staying nearby. That creates resentment, not respect. That triggers confusion instead of recalibration. True withdrawal is clean, no explanations, no emotional residue, no passive aggression. You don't punish people with silence. You reclaim your time and attention as resources, and resources gain value when they're no longer infinite. This principle works everywhere, in relationships, in work environments, in social dynamics, in negotiations. If your removal causes confusion, you mattered. If it causes panic, you held leverage. If it causes nothing, you were already expendable and now you have clarity. Here's the secret that most people never learn. Whoever controls the frame controls perception, and perception determines everything. You don't need dominance if you own interpretation. The frame is the invisible boundary that decides how actions get understood. It answers unspoken questions before they're even asked. Who has authority? Who reacts? Who explains? Who waits? Who's nervous? And who's calm? People rarely argue facts. They argue meanings. And if you let others decide what your actions mean, you surrender power without even fighting. Watch two people perform identical behavior. One gets labeled confident, the other gets called arrogant. The difference isn't behavior, it's frame. It's the invisible context that determines how the action gets interpreted. The mistake people make is trying to defend themselves inside someone else's narrative. Defense accepts their premise. The moment you accept the premise, you've already lost. You're playing their game by their rules on their board. True control comes from redefining the situation silently. You don't say, "That's not what I meant." You act in a way that makes alternative interpretations irrelevant. You demonstrate through behavior what actually matters, not through words defending yourself. This is why powerful individuals rarely clarify. Clarification lowers status, it signals uncertainty. It suggests you're defensive about how you're being perceived. Instead, they behave consistently until the environment adapts. Consistency over explanation reshapes perception faster than any amount of words ever could. Machiavelli observed that framing begins before words. It lives in timing, in posture, in pacing, in restraint, in the decision to speak or remain silent. When you speak too quickly, you signal urgency. When you over-detail, you signal insecurity. When you rush to justify, you signal vulnerability. When you're defensive about accusations, you signal they hit something real. Calm pacing reframes the situation immediately. Silence reframes it even faster. People assume the unbothered person holds advantage. Composure is the most dangerous move because it looks passive while actually being aggressive. When pressure is expected and you respond with none, confidence fractures for the person applying pressure. They question their own position. They fill the void with assumptions. And assumptions rarely favor them. That's how frames collapse. You came here thinking you needed to learn how to fight dirty people using their own tactics. What you actually learned is something more important than that. You learned that you've been interpreting power through a lens that doesn't match reality. You've been taught that honesty wins, that transparency builds trust, that fairness determines outcomes, that if you're good enough, clear enough, honest enough, things work out, that the world is fundamentally fair and moral. And in a world where everyone shares those beliefs, where everyone's playing by the same ethical rule book, you're safe. You'd be golden. Everything would work the way it's supposed to. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where some people have learned that the appearance of those things is more valuable than the actual thing. where perception matters more than reality, where the narrative that gets told determines the outcome, where the person who understands the game beats the person who doesn't, regardless of who's morally right. And now that you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to playing checkers. You've seen the chessboard. You've learned the rules that have always been there, but that nobody ever teaches you. The 7 principles you absorbed don't teach you to become manipulative. They teach you to stop being blind. They show you the actual game beneath the game. They reveal what dirty players see that keeps them ahead. They illuminate the rules that have always been there, but that nobody ever teaches you formally. And here's what happens once you internalize this. You become harder to manipulate, not because you're colder, but because you're clearer. You stop confusing good intentions with good outcomes. You stop expecting people to operate by rules they've never agreed to follow. You stop being surprised when people prioritize themselves. Your relationships don't become colder. Your life doesn't become meaner. You don't become someone who betrays people. You become someone who sees clearly. You become someone who understands the actual dynamics at play. You become someone who can navigate those dynamics without losing yourself in them. Your life doesn't become harder. It becomes quieter. Your words don't become crueler. They become sharper. Your presence doesn't become colder. It becomes undeniable. Some people won't like the shift. They'll feel uncomfortable around you, not because you changed toward them, but because you changed away from their control. That's the cost of clarity, and it's worth paying, because power isn't cruelty. It's not deception. It's not manipulation. Power is knowing when to move and when to be still, when to speak and when silence does the work, when to engage and when to let others reveal themselves. Power is clarity about what you want, refusal to chase what others want from you, and the ability to reshape circumstances without confrontation. Power is reading incentives instead of intentions, controlling access instead of defending outcomes, staying unfinished while others scramble, keeping your reactions private, thinking in layers instead of lines, making absence valuable, framing the situation instead of arguing inside it. Power is being unmanipulable, not through coldness, but through seeing the board clearly, not through becoming heartless, but through becoming honest about how the world actually operates. Machiavelli understood that history belongs to people who see the game clearly, not to the most moral, not to the most talented, not to the most hard-working, to the people who understand the actual rules before they start playing, to the people who see what's actually happening instead of what they wish was happening. You now have that understanding. You've been given the knowledge that most people never access. You've been shown the framework that successful people use but never teach. The question isn't what you learned. The question is what you do with it. Are you going to keep playing the game the way you were taught? Or are you going to start playing the game the way it's actually played? Are you going to keep expecting fairness in environments that reward clarity? Or are you going to start operating from the rules that actually exist? The difference is everything, and you already know which choice matters.